All right, everyone, welcome back to the show for another deep dive. And today we are taking a look at the world of ancient warriors.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. We have this great article that's based on a YouTube video called Debunking Myths, Ancient Warriors and Warfare.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at all kinds of things like knights and samurai gladiators, Vikings.
It's amazing how many myths and legends surround those warriors.
Hey, no, it's really unbelievable. And I'm excited to bust some of those myths today.
All right, let's do it.
So let's start with knights.
Okay.
You know those classic images we have of knights in shining armor, rescuing damsels in distress, always fighting for justice and chivalry.
Right, the epitome of honor and nobility.
Exactly, but our article paints a very different picture.
So what's the reality behind those shining knights?
Well, it turns out that many knights were actually more interested in more earthly matters, like land, wealth, and power.
That makes sense. I mean, we are talking about the medieval period, right?
Exactly, and warfare back then was brutal.
Yeah, you don't really get to be a knight by being a pacifist.
That's true, and knights were often right there in the thick of it, pillaging villages, looting treasures, and taking hostages for ransom.
Wow, that's a far cry from the chivalrous heroes we see in the movies.
I know, it is. It really is. And the article even mentions that some knights were so violent that their own kings had to punish them.
Really? So much for that code of chivalry.
Well, the idea of chivalry did exist, that chivalric code.
Right.
It seems like it was more of an ideal than a common practice.
I guess realpolitik often trumps idealism.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So while some knights might have aspired to those lofty notions of honor, ambition, and self-preservation, often won out.
Okay, so knights weren't always the noble protectors we imagined them to be.
Nope, not always. All right, let's move on to another legendary warrior, the samurai.
The samurai shrouded in mystique in that legendary Bushido code.
Exactly, honor, unwavering loyalty, self-sacrifice.
Such a powerful image.
It is, but is that the whole story?
Well, before we dive into that, I think it's important to understand that Bushido, as we romanticize it today, was largely constructed in the Meiji era.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, imagine Japan is going through this period of rapid modernization, trying to establish a new national identity. So they look back to the samurai and their code of Bushido as this unifying force.
So the samurai we see in movies, those stoic warriors bound by this strict code that might not be entirely accurate.
Exactly. In reality, samurai were often quite pragmatic and opportunistic, especially during times of conflict. Their loyalties could shift depending on what benefited their clan.
Makes sense. I mean, we're talking about feudal Japan survival, often dependent on strategic alliances and knowing how to play the game of power.
You got it.
And speaking of survival, our article also challenges our perception of the katana, that iconic samurai sword.
Oh yeah, the katana.
I always thought that was their primary weapon in battle.
It's certainly a beautiful and formidable weapon, but it wasn't their main tool in battle.
No.
Samurai actually relied more on the bow, the yumi, and the spear. The yari, the katana, was more of a personal defense weapon, a sidearm, if you will.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's one of those misconceptions that's been perpetuated by popular culture.
So fascinating how our perceptions can be shaped by what we see in movies and TV.
Absolutely. Oh, so we've talked about knights, we've talked about samurai, ready for another warrior group.
Absolutely, hit me with it.
Gladiators.
Gladiators! Oh man, those epic battles to the death in the Roman arena.
Always a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, I mean, so dramatic. Was it really always a fight to the death, though?
Well, gladiatorial combat was definitely brutal and dangerous, no doubt about that. But it wasn't always a fight to the death.
Really?
Gladiators were highly trained and very valuable.
Yeah, I guess they wouldn't be cheap to replace.
Exactly. So their owners had a vested interest in keeping them alive.
So what about that whole thumbs up, thumbs down thing?
Yes, the iconic gesture of the Roman emperor deciding a gladiator's fate.
Yeah, I always pictured the emperor giving the thumbs down and the crowd going wild.
Well, the historical evidence for that specific gesture is pretty shaky.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's more likely that a gladiator's fate was determined by a combination of factors. The severity of their injuries, the crowd's reaction, and of course the owner's financial interests.
So the emperor might have had some say, but it wasn't always that simple.
Exactly. It was a more complex decision-making process than we often see depicted.
Interesting. And, speaking of gladiators, the article mentions this group called Octorati gladiators who were actually free men.
Yeah.
And they chose to fight.
I know. It's kind of surprising, right? Why would anyone willingly enter the arena?
Exactly. It seems crazy.
Well, it might seem counterintuitive, but for some, the arena offered a path to fame and fortune.
Really?
Some Octorati were driven by the allure of celebrity, The thrill of combat, the roar of the crowd. Others might have seen it as a way to pay off debts or even improve their social standing.
Wow, gladiators as ancient celebrities. That's fascinating.
It really is. They could gain significant wealth and influence some even wield in political power.
It's amazing how much we're learning about these ancient warriors. It's really challenging those preconceived notions I had.
That's what I love about history. There's always something new to discover.
All right, so we've covered knights, samurai, gladiators. Who's next on our list?
Well, how about those fearsome Vikings?
Vikings? Oh, man, I can already picture them. Those big, burly warriors with horned helmets raiding villages.
Ah, yes, the iconic image of the Viking warrior.
But those horned helmets, I'm going to guess those weren't a thing.
You would be absolutely right.
Ah, I knew it.
The horned helmet is probably one of the most pervasive myths about Vikings, and there's absolutely no archaeological evidence to support it.
So where did that image come from?
It seems to have originated in 19th century opera productions.
Opera? Really?
Yeah, it seems like costume designers wanted to create this dramatic, visually striking look for the Vikings, so they added horns to their helmets, and somehow the image stuck.
Wow, so a theatrical invention,
That's right.
basically.
Exactly, and it's taken on a life of its own.
So what did real Viking helmets look like?
They were actually quite simple and practical, made of iron or leather, designed for protection.
That makes more sense.
Remember, Vikings were renowned for their seafaring and raiding tactics, so their helmets needed to be functional above all else.
Yeah, no horns needed for that.
Exactly. All right, ready to debunk another myth?
Hiya, let's do it.
Okay, how about this one? Spartans, those legendary warriors who always fought to the death.
Ah, yes. The Spartans known for their incredible discipline and courage.
The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, that's the image that comes to mind, right?
Yeah, fighting to the last man against overwhelming odds.
A truly epic story.
But do they always fight with no regard for their own safety?
Well, that's a common misconception. While Spartans were undoubtedly fierce and highly disciplined warriors, they weren't averse to retreating when it made strategic sense.
Wait, so you're telling me the Spartans actually thought about strategy?
Absolutely. They understood that survival and achieving their objectives were more important than blind heroics.
Huh. So they weren't just these mindless killing machines.
They were actually quite skilled tacticians and strategists.
Yeah.
And in fact, they even suffered defeats like their loss to the Thebans at the Battle of Leuctra.
So even the Spartans weren't invincible?
No army is.
What about that image of them charging into battle bare-chested with flowing red capes?
Another myth, I'm afraid.
Ah, man.
Spartan warriors wore bronze armor for protection, breastplates, greaves for their legs, and of course helmets.
Okay, so not quite the image we see in the movies.
Nope. Hollywood often takes liberties with historical accuracy.
Well, this deep dive is already blowing my mind. I had no idea how many misconceptions I had about these ancient warriors.
It's amazing what we can learn when we start to dig a little deeper, right?
Absolutely, and we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover.
I'm ready for more.
Okay, then stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our deep dive into ancient warriors, uncovering the truth behind those legendary figures. And before the break, we were talking about the Celts.
Yes, those fierce warriors from the Iron Age.
Often portrayed as these, wild, uncivilized barbarians.
Right, charging into battle half naked.
Exactly. But as we were saying, the Celts were actually much more than that.
Oh, absolutely. They were skilled artisans and innovators.
And let's not forget, they were the ones who invented chainmail armor.
A truly revolutionary development in military technology.
It's hard to imagine warfare before chainmail.
Yeah.
Suddenly warriors have this much higher level of protection against all those swords and axes.
It must have been a game changer on the battlefield.
Definitely. And the Romans even adopted chainmail for their own legions after encountering the Celts.
They saw its effectiveness firsthand and thought, hey, we need some of that.
Yeah, why not, right? And speaking of the Celts, the article also mentions their use of psychological warfare.
Ah, yes, those intimidating battle cries
Yeah.
and the sound of war trumpets echoing across the battlefield.
That must have been terrifying for their enemies.
Absolutely. The psychological aspect of warfare is often overlooked, but it's always been a crucial factor.
I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it makes sense.
Just imagine yourself as a soldier, hearing those war horns and those fierce cries coming over the enemy lines. It would definitely get your adrenaline pumping.
Yeah, no doubt it would be unsettling, to say the least.
It's fascinating how some tactics remain effective throughout history across different cultures.
Like, human psychology doesn't really change all that much, does it?
Not really. The things that instilled fear and anxiety centuries ago probably still have a similar effect on us today.
Okay, so we've talked about the Celts and their surprisingly advanced military techniques, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about medieval swords.
Ah, yes. Those iconic weapons of the knights and warriors of old.
You know those huge, heavy swords you always see in movies?
The ones that require, like, superhuman strength to wield.
Exactly. I always wondered how anyone could actually fight with something that big and clunky.
Well, it turns out that those massive, unwieldy swords are mostly a product of Hollywood's imagination.
Wait, seriously?
In reality, medieval swords were surprisingly light and well-balanced.
No way. So all those epic battle scenes where warriors are swinging these giant swords around, that's not really accurate.
Not really think about it. A sword that's too heavy
Hmm.
would be slow and cumbersome in battle.
That's true. I guess you'd be exhausted after a few swings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Medieval blacksmiths were incredibly skilled. They knew how to craft swords that were both strong and lightweight, allowing for speed and precision in combat.
So where did this idea of the super heavy sword come from?
It's probably a combination of factors. Remember those ceremonial swords we talked about earlier? The ones designed for display and not actual combat?
Right, right.
Well, those are often much larger and heavier, which might have given people the wrong impression.
Ah, so people saw those ceremonial swords and assumed all medieval swords were like that.
Exactly. And then there's the element of, artistic license in movies and paintings. Artists sometimes exaggerate the size and weight of swords to create a more dramatic and visually impactful image.
It's like those ancient battle scenes we talked about earlier, with hundreds of warriors clashing in this chaotic melee. Remember how we learned that those depictions are often far from the truth?
Precisely. In reality, ancient armies relied heavily on discipline and formation, not chaotic brawls.
The Greeks had their famous phalanx formation, right?
Exactly. A tightly packed line of warriors with overlapping shields, creating this nearly impenetrable wall of bronze and flesh.
And then the Romans with their testudo formation.
Ah, yes. The testudo or tortoise formation, where soldiers locked shields together to form a protective shell.
Like a giant moving bunker.
It's amazing how those ancient armies were able to achieve such a high level of coordination and discipline on the battlefield.
It's a testament to their training and organization. Battles weren't just random brawls. They were complex strategic engagements that required careful planning and execution.
Absolutely. And that's something that often gets lost in those Hollywood depictions.
This all ties back to what we've been discussing, the importance of looking beyond those romanticized versions of history and delving into the complexities.
Exactly. We can't just accept everything we see in movies or read in popular history books at face value. We need to engage with the material, critically question our sources, and seek out multiple perspectives.
And that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding, isn't it? It's like we're uncovering hidden truth and piecing together a more accurate and nuanced understanding of the past.
It's a journey of discovery, and it's one that I find endlessly fascinating.
All right, so we've explored knights, samurai gladiators, Celts, Vikings, Spartans, medieval swords, and so much more, but we've covered a lot of ground today, and I think it's time for us to take a quick break. Welcome back to the show, everyone. It's time to wrap up our epic journey through the world of ancient warriors.
And what a journey it's been.
I know I'm still kind of reeling from all those misconceptions we debunked.
It's amazing how much our views of history are shaped by popular culture, isn't it?
It really is. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is realizing that we can't just take everything we see in movies or read in books at face value.
Absolutely. We need to be more critical consumers of information, especially when it comes to history.
Like, remember those epic battle scenes with warriors swinging those impossibly heavy swords?
Right. I always wondered how anyone could actually fight with something that big.
Me too. Well, it turns out those massive swords were mostly a Hollywood invention.
Exactly. In reality, medieval swords were designed for agility and precision, not brute force.
Makes you wonder how those misconceptions start in the first place, right?
Sometimes it's just a matter of misinterpreting things. People might see a ceremonial sword and assume all swords were like that.
Right, or artists might exaggerate certain details for dramatic effect.
Yeah. Bigger and heavier looks more impressive on screen.
So it's crucial to be critical and do your research.
Absolutely. Don't just accept everything you see or hear at face value.
And that's what we try to do with these deep dives. Encourage people to think critically and explore history with a discerning eye.
Exactly. It's all about uncovering those hidden truths and challenging our assumptions.
I feel like we've peeled back layers of myth and legend to reveal a more accurate picture of these ancient warriors.
And that's what makes history so fascinating, isn't it? It's a constant process of discovery and reevaluation.
Throughout this deep dive, I was struck by how many parallels we can draw between the past and present.
Oh, definitely history often repeats itself.
Like, for example, the way the Celts used psychological warfare with those battle cries and war trumpets.
It reminds me of how propaganda is used in modern conflicts, you know, to instill fear and influence public opinion.
It's amazing how those same tactics are still effective today.
Human psychology hasn't really changed all that much, has it?
I guess not.
Huh.
So, as we wrap up this journey through the world of ancient warriors, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think it's important to recognize that history is not black and white. It's full of complexities and contradictions.
And we need to embrace those complexities, right?
Absolutely. We should strive for historical accuracy, but we should also appreciate the power of storytelling and the role it plays in shaping our understanding of the past.
Even if those stories aren't entirely accurate.
Right, they can still reveal deeper truths about the values and aspirations of the cultures that created them.
So, as we continue to explore history, we should do so with a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness.
Always willing to challenge our assumptions and embrace the nuances.
Well said. So, to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep uncovering those hidden truths.
You never know what fascinating insights you might find.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this epic deep dive into the world of ancient warriors.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and those history books open.